we have on building organizational EQ, but really we want to also have this as an opportunity for you to reflect and share and really collaborate with your peers as well. So just want to sort of set that framing before we get started. And so now let me hand it over to Friederike Alt as well. I'd love to have you introduce yourself as well. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sarah. So my name is Friederike Alt. I'm a coach and an organizational psychologist, and I'm taking care of organizational development in OSRAM. And I'm really excited to host this session together today with Sarah, and I'm really looking forward. As Sarah said, it's mainly about you today. It's about sharing your experiences and sharing all of our best practices. And this is why I would like to dive right into the introduction. We can't introduce each other like very thoroughly, but what we are very curious about is where are you located in the world, and 2 words about how are you feeling right now. So please go to the chat, which is in the middle of your screen in the bottom, and type in your answers to the 2 questions. Great, thank you so much for sharing. Oh yeah, I can imagine in Asia it's really, really late already.
I love seeing this range of countries from France, Brazil, Germany, California, of course, Saudi Arabia, Philippines.
That's awesome.
Lots of people feeling good too. What an optimistic and happy group.
Great. Yeah, so many different time zones and so many different countries. So I'm so looking forward to the exchange of the diverse group. Great. So a real mix of countries. Thank you so much for sharing that. As we said, you're going to have the chance to really get to know each other more in breakout groups later on. Before we start, content-wise, we would like to do a couple of agreements which are important for us to make this session work. So first of all, your presence is really, really important to us. So that's why we ask you to really focus on the session and to close all other programs if possible. And in case something happens with the technology, I think this can happen anytime. So let's stay calm. Let's try to figure it out together. And it's really important to us to create a safe space. So we want to ask you to keep everything confidential in this virtual room today. On the right-hand side, you can see a couple of Zoom tips. So I think most of you did already, but in case you have a camera on your laptop, please switch on your camera. We would really appreciate to see your faces. And please put on your headphones so that we can hear each other. And it's also going to work out in the breakout groups. In case you need any help, so please chat Silly and Steph. Steph, thank you so much for helping everybody who's having technology problems. And we really encourage you to switch on the side-by-side mode because we want you to have a split screen. So seeing the slides on the one hand,
inside yourself is we like to take a moment at the beginning of any meeting or any gathering that we have to allow everyone to really arrive in the space. And you probably know that experience where you sort of come in, you're rushed, you've had another meeting, you sort of show up and you say, oh, what are we doing here? And so really what we do is we do a mindfulness practice to help us really land and ground ourselves in the space. So I'm going to invite us to all do that together now. So wherever you are seated in the world, just take a moment now to, if you can, just sort of place your feet on the floor and just have a moment there, just sort of feeling your legs touching the chair. Maybe just sort of one of that, see folks moving around. And just have a moment just to take a few deep breaths, just to kind of let whatever's happening in your day, just kind of let that ease away a little bit. So just taking a few deep breaths now. You might want to lower your gaze, or if you're comfortable, you can also close your eyes if that feels okay. And one of the things I'm going to invite you to do now is to take part in what we call a 3-breath practice. And the 3-breath practice, what we're going to do is, on that first breath, you're just going to bring your attention to the fact that you're breathing. Just become aware that you're breathing on that first breath. And then in the second breath, you're just going to relax the body any amount that you can, just a little bit. And then in that third breath, you can ask yourself, what's most important now? What's the most important thing for you to be doing right in this moment? So just in your own pace, just see if you can take another 3 breaths following that practice. Just when you're ready, just slowly opening your eyes and returning back to the room here. Wonderful. Thank you so much to everyone for participating in that practice. I really appreciate it. So to just briefly offer a short introduction to Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute so that you understand who we are and how we come to be talking about building organizational EQ. So Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute was originally born at Google back in 2012. And then we became a separate organization, a separate nonprofit, which is what we are today. And we operate in over 50 countries. We have 700 certified teachers around the world, soon to be 1,000, which is very exciting for us. And we really operate in a range of organizational contexts. So you might imagine, we could work with, say, a nonprofit and maybe, say, 200 staff, all the way up until working with kind of multinational companies with sort of 10,000 plus staff, multi-country, multi-site rollouts of our programming. So we really do a very wide range of things. And you might also be wondering too, what kind of verticals that we work at. We've run our programming with organizations at the sort of the C-suite level, so those kind of, really at that executive level, all the way to doing kind of broad introductions to individual contributor populations. So it's really, I think emotional intelligence is one of those incredible skill competencies that really covers across large swathes of an organization in different areas and contexts. So we'll get into that more, but I just want to offer that as a kind of high-level overview, so to speak. And when we think about our roadmap for today, I want to kind of offer you just a sense of where we're headed. So we're going to start off with our why. What is the reason behind all of this? Why should we be introducing emotional intelligence inside our organizations? I think that's a fair question to start with. We're also going to introduce 5 principles that we've seen to be really effective in working inside organizational contexts, whatever your organization may be. And then, of course, as we've promised, we really want to give you an opportunity to cross-collaborate with other people on the call today and also have an exchange with your peers. So that's going to be our roadmap of where we go in this hour together.
So thank you so much for sharing the roadmap for today, Sarah. I would like to dive deeper into the why and share my personal why, actually, because 5 years ago, I was in charge of designing a program for new leaders in our organization. We just spun off from another company and we had to design everything from scratch. And back then, of course, we wanted to figure out, so what are the most challenging situations for new leaders in our organization? And we did a couple of stakeholder interviews and asked them. And interestingly, many of them came up with very similar situations. So it was, in most cases, was meetings where they got out of where they said, why did I hold back? So I was scared of something. Why didn't I address my point? Or why did I come across so aggressive? Or they didn't dare to address conflicts. So speaking of the fire under the table, so conflicts everybody is somehow aware of, but are not addressed. So they're very hesitant to really address that. So that's one of the reasons why we integrated mindfulness elements into the program. For example, mindful walking and also body scan, but also a couple of more elements. And now, like 5 years later, I talked to several of the managers and asked them, after 5 years of experience in a leadership position, what are the aspects you still remember from this program? And they, of course, remember, but they also apply the mindfulness elements a lot. Many of them admit that it's also, and I guess many of you know that as well, it's not so easy to really implement a daily practice or a very regular practice. But what most of them do is really using mindfulness practices before important customer meetings or before important like top management presentations, to be really focused on what is going on and how can I bring out the best, and how can I address this topic, and how can I also deal with the emotions of my counterpart. And that's many of the benefits they were mentioning, to really be aware of what's going on inside myself and to create the space between like what's going on and then my reaction. Being an organizational development professional, I think it's really crucial to learn this language of, or it's like learning a language of how, because we talk a lot about the what in everyday business, but we tend to neglect the how a little bit. So really bringing back this, how do we do things? And I like to compare that also to going to the gym. So just as going to the gym, we can also train our minds to be more focused, to be more in the current moment, to really do what we're doing right now. And I'm convinced that this is really important for an organization to strive towards our strategic goals, because in these times there's so much distraction all around us, especially right now. So that's really important to foster that in a changing environment, and especially to create a culture, a working culture we all want to work in. And having shared my personal why and my organization why, I would like to go to a broader scale. So on a broader scale, the World Economic Forum had a look at the future of work. So how is the future of work going to look like in 2020, in 2 years from now? And what they've identified is a really high number. So it's 54% of employees have to be either upskilled or reskilled by 2022. Which is a huge challenge actually for us as L&D representatives, because that's one of our main tasks. And you might be wondering, so what are the crucial skills they should learn when they have to be or upskilled? And you can see the top 10 skills they have identified here, and one of them is emotional intelligence.
And I think one of the things that's also really interesting from the points that Friederike has been sharing is we kind of have this sense that there's you know, an organizational imperative, and then also more broadly, there's kind of an industry-wide imperative to improve emotional intelligence. But I also imagine too that some of you might be wondering, well, you know, how does that kind of really work in a real business context?
Sorry, Sarah. Sorry.
I'm so sorry.
Hello. Yes, no, I was just going to ask if there is any possibility to see the slide again, the like the top qualities, yes, if it's possible, please. Sure. I was just reading and I was not able to read it fully.
No problem. So well, you'll receive those after the presentation.
Perfect. Okay,
so
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
sorry.
Don't worry about that. No worries at all. Thank you for that question. And so just as we if we think about, and I love that, as we think about the need for those top 10 skills needs that are there, we also kind of look at how is that going to be implemented inside a business context. And so here's an example. One of our champions, Peter Bosselman at SAP, he started out really as in a technical role. It wasn't related to L&D or HR in any way. And he actually built out a program inside SAP that has led to the training of over 9,000 of their staff in emotional intelligence from the ground up. And he is now at an executive level, he is the Chief Mindfulness Officer, a role that he essentially created for himself as part of his initiative. in bringing EQ and mindfulness inside his organization. So we really want to be clear that the dream is there, the dream is possible. You can really do this in a grand and scaled way, whatever the organization that you might have. And so with that in mind, we really want to hear from you directly. So we'd love to take a pulse on what are the opportunities and challenges that you are facing at the moment as a professional. We'd love to hear from you what's on your mind in terms of things you'd love to see, things you're struggling with. So just please, if you want to add in anything here into the chat, please just write again, as Friederike shared, it's in the bottom of your screen there. Just noting in any challenges or opportunities that you might be facing where you're at right now. Yes, excellent. So lack of budget cut. Yes, yeah, thank you for sharing that. Reduced people and culture team size. Yes. Just waiting for any, oh, yes, thank you. So Rashida, yes, lack of support or interest from others. Yes, that's something we've seen. Diversity training, moving everything to virtual. Yes, that's a big challenge at the moment. Having to do more and keeping the team engaged and connected. Yes, so that's certainly is a challenge at the moment. Mindfulness is still largely unknown as a development tool in our country. What a great opportunity you have, Dina. That's always a very exciting stage to be at. So technology and automation capabilities, yeah. Balancing strategy and focus on day-to-day tasks. New leadership due to layoffs. Yes, so you're in a situation where there's culture change, people change. Yeah, thank you. Transferring the culture in the community to online and remote work. Yeah, this is all very, very powerful stuff. Thank you. Steph, were there any that I've missed? I know it can be challenging to get all of those in there.
A lot of different things, but I think you got the highlights there.
Okay, covered the highlights, yes. Wonderful. So thank you so much to everyone to share those. I think certainly we would all agree that there are some pretty sizable changes happening to industries around the world at the moment. A lot of hearing a lot of things to do with layoffs, changing in team size. There's a lot of obviously some of the challenges of working virtually as well. So it's great to hear that those are at top of mind, and we're going to cover across some of the different ways that we've been working with those ourselves. And then of course we want to hear your best practices as well.
So thank you so much for sharing the challenges. I can relate to many of them myself personally. And Sarah and I actually had the same question. And that's why we did a couple of interviews earlier this year. So we interviewed business and L&D managers. It was actually before the global breakout of COVID. And the representatives, some of them are here today. So thank you so much for giving us your time and really giving us these interesting insights. And the interview partners, some of them are SIY clients, some of them are not yet. And some of them, they are located in various countries across the US and Europe. And what are the basically things they said regarding, first of all, what are the skills that are really relevant for the company? Second of all, what are the hurdles? So what's really challenging? And that relates to many aspects you were just mentioning in the chat. And then what helps? So what's the best practice from their experience? So first of all, pre-COVID, or before the global breakout of COVID, they said EQ-related skills are really future critical for our company. And interestingly, this meaning has even been accelerated for many of the interview partners. So they said there's even more stress, there's even more distraction now, and especially having the challenge of having employees working in different locations remotely, it's even more and more important to have these emotional intelligence competencies. So the benefits they see in general is really making people people feel connected, even not being in the same place. Really having great leadership because you understand the emotions of the other persons better. Keeping focus despite so many distractions in our VUCA world, and also realizing the importance of emotions. I think everybody understands that now, working remotely, really having to combine the personal and professional life, that can be really challenging. and then really being able to deal in a much better way with my own stress, but also the stress of my teammates, of my colleagues, and so on. And having heard that, I think you would think, so what are the hurdles? Why is it still in some places so challenging to implement EQ-related programs? And as you were sharing as well, they said also there's lots of skepticism, especially from the top management. And interestingly, they said in many cases, they said the CEO isn't so much the problem. So many of the C-level representatives are already pretty convinced that this is important. But in many cases, the direct reports seem to be very skeptic and are the key stakeholders that should be convinced in the future. Budget and time restraints are also an important topic. Interestingly, in the US, it has been mentioned more the time restraints, and in Europe, it has been mentioned more the budget restraints. I think that's also an important topic you should also, or you can, of course, discuss in the peer exchange later on. So coming from the skills, from the hurdles, so what helps? What are the best practices they recommended? What they said is crucial to have really up-to-date EQ research on hand, to really have the scientific background and ROI data. So to really make the business case and to have data you can really convince the management with. What's important as well, so speaking of working remotely a lot, but also in different places or different countries, so is an on-demand technology solution to offer blended and more flexible learning solutions more and more and more. And I guess many of you see that relevance as well. And what you can see as well is that cross-company exchange is really crucial. Why is that the case? I think many of us are either a small department or in some cases even the only person driving a topic like that. So that's why it's so important to really bring together our thoughts and our experiences. And that's one of the main reasons why we're offering the session today, actually.
Thanks so much, Friederike. So, of course, the question becomes, we've shared the landscape, we understand where we're at. So how do we make this real? How do we actually go through some sort of process and really foster EQ inside an organization? So we want to share with you 5 principles that we've seen be effective across a wide range of different organizational types and different country contexts as well. I think that's important to share. So the 5 principles that we have, and just again reminding folks who are, I know lots of folks are taking notes, so again you will see these in our recap. But the first is really to embody the work. The second, really make the case. The third, looking at pilot, test and iteration considerations. The fourth is sustain a learning journey, and we'll talk more about that. And the fifth is really implementing strategic measurement and reporting. So let's dive in and look firstly at embody the work. And perhaps, you know, sometimes for folks who are coming from a more, perhaps a traditional L&D or HR background, sometimes what we might be focused on is kind of the what of the training. So let's get to a specific result, or how do we kind of measure certain things against our benchmarks or our internal pulse surveys. But really what we're talking about here is, when we talk about embodiment, we're talking about how something is taught is as critical as what is being taught. So it's not just that we teach mindfulness and EQ as a sort of competency or a functional skill set. We're really actually teaching folks how to show up and be different. And a great example of this is one of our partners, Janae Johnson, who is leading the implementation of the Search Inside Yourself program in the San Francisco Department of Public Health. And that's a very large organization with a very diverse population of employees and then also clients that they serve. And what she's doing there is she's really taken a highly kind of embodied lens into how she's rolling that out. So to the 9,000 staff that will receive the program, she's running a train the trainer model. And what she's done there is she's really infused a trauma-informed lens onto that program to help serve the needs of that particular population. So making very specific changes to the types of EQ training. She also really has a very deep personal practice of mindfulness, which she then embodies in all of the meetings and the ways that she shows up among her staff. And then the final component too that's also very important is that they draw, in the teacher training program, they draw from the staff that actually work inside the various divisions of the Department of Health. And in actually having those staff become the teachers themselves, it actually has an opportunity for the program to be framed in the language of the company itself, and really to have a kind of sense of those lived values throughout the rollout. So she's been a really powerful and I think inspirational example for us of how to really embody a new way of being inside an organization. And I think the second and very important component that many of you will know if you've ever tried to convince someone to start a new program inside your organization is the role of making the case. And one of the things that I think is really interesting here, and perhaps different from how you might traditionally make the case for a program, is generally when we think of kind of L&D style programming, we tend to think of them as developing kind of deep and specific skill sets in a certain sort of technical or functional domain. And one of the differences here with mindfulness and EQ is that they're essentially very broad-based skills. They're essentially what we would call meta skills. So they're skills that are broad-based. They cover off across a lot of different population types inside an organization. And they actually enable a whole lot of very powerful competencies in many different domains. So the competencies that we connect to in our program is we think about them in 3 buckets. We think about enhanced leadership. So emotional intelligence creates the conditions for enhanced leadership. It also creates the conditions for sustained performance. It also, in the third part as well, and sometimes folks don't think about this one, it also enables a sense of well-being inside the organization. So it really builds an interconnected ecosystem of behavior change that really transcends just a specific skill set, so to speak. And a great example of that that I want to share also is one of our partners, Procter & Gamble. And they have implemented the SIY program inside their organization, but they've actually renamed it and they call it Improve Your Life. And that actually plays very closely to their organizational tagline, which is touching lives, improving lives. And what they've done there is they've actually used the program as an expression of the company's value set. And so they've actually weaved a whole lot of the company's values inside the program to give the employees an understanding that their company's mission is to provide products that improve lives, but actually that their mission as a company also is to then improve the lives of their employees. So it's highly congruent with their overall brand. And we found that to be a kind of a very successful strategy to build a case inside an organization.
So thank you so much for sharing that. I love the examples from different companies. And as Sarah was mentioning, so mindfulness is a very broad skill set, and there are lots and lots of practices around. You can practice mindfulness in every day, and that's one of the examples. So mindful listening. So just as this doctors on the slide, we would love to do a practice now. So doing a breakout session of 2 people each. So that you elaborate or that you practice mindful listening. And for that purpose, we would like you to share what is your vision for implementing EQ in your organization. So this is the question you're going to answer for 2 minutes, and you have these 2 minutes completely for yourself. So you're not going to be interrupted because the other person is mindfully listening. And Steph is going to assign you in breakout groups of 2. So after the 2 minutes, you share something, you're gonna swap, and then the other person, your counterpart, is gonna share his or her answer to the question, and then you're gonna be redirected automatically to the main room. And I think to make it easier, you also be able to see a timer at the top of your screen so that you can see when the 2 minutes are over, so that you have time to swap. So yes. We wish you a very good session for mindful listening.
And you will probably be in a group of 2, but you may be in a group of 3, just looking at the numbers here. And yeah, as Friederike mentioned, you'll have 4 minutes in total. So wait till you get to the broadcast message to swap. And I'm doing my best to assign everyone. If you happen to find yourself in a room alone, we'll do our best to move you around and give you a partner or two.
Thank you so much, Steph. That's great.
Great. I think we've had some people drop off. So hopefully we're in.
Had some people rejoin us in the main room.
Yeah. Let's see, for you guys who just came back to the main room, I can put you in a room together if that works for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
It's a technical problem.
Oh, a technical problem with the breakouts?
Mm.
Well, let's try this again. If it doesn't work, you're welcome to join us in the main room.
You don't hear me, or?
I can hear you.
Are you?
Oh.
Good.
Yeah, it looks like your internet might be a little wobbly there.
Yeah.
Okay, let's give it a try.
Okay.
I don't see you, however.
Really that rubber meets the road pilot and iteration standpoint. And I know many of you on the call are probably pros at doing the basic pilot and iteration of any programming, of course. But we'd love to kind of add in some additional pieces here that we think really relate specifically to the kind of the EQ context as well. So I want to share a great example. One of our partners, Marcus King, he's a learning and development manager at ST Microelectronics, and they're one of the largest semiconductor companies in the world. They're located in a number of different countries, primarily Europe and North America. And Marcus was really interested in improving the emotional intelligence, specifically of his individual contributor pool in region Americas. And one of the things that many of you will know if you're working in the L&D or HR space is that often we have a lot of training that's really geared towards those sort of senior leaders, but the individual contributors often don't get the types of training and support that they might need to really flourish. And so Marcus kind of wanted to really address that concern inside the company. And so what he did was he set up a specific pilot around looking to address the individual contributor needs. What they actually found below that as a kind of a deeper issue that emerged was also that in that particular population group, there was a need for intergenerational communication building, which was also one gap that they'd identified. And a second component there as well was the need to improve the siloing of communications from across different teams. And so what they did is they ran a emotional intelligence pilot, the SIY program, across region Americas. And they found that in particular, strong positioning was really important for the program's success. And what we mean by that there is really positioning the program as a kind of a business initiative. Marcus found that he was having a lot of questions of the nature of, you know, should I wear yoga pants to this program? You know, is that sort of what we're going to be doing? Are we going to be sort of, you know, on the floor? Sort of, you know, people didn't have a sense of what to expect. And so he found it really valuable to actually be very explicit with people about the connection to business in terms of what attire people could bring, and that really it was okay to have these emotional intelligence discussions in the context of a workplace. And so that was really important for their initial success. And I think the second and kind of or other important component here was really about bringing along stakeholders. And what we mean by that is we've found in general that for a program to be successful, it often needs senior stakeholders to actually go through the program and experience it in real time. One thing we find with emotional intelligence is that it's harder to describe it cognitively than it is to actually have an experience of showing up differently. So actually having stakeholders in the room really led to their personal transformations, which then meant that they were much more bought in to expanding that program out across the region. So I think those some really kind of important pilot and iteration learnings that Marcus had shared with us as part of our partnership. And so let's also transition and think about the sustainment of a learning journey. And I know certainly among L&D professionals, this is a really kind of a hot topic and something that I know provokes a lot of kind of passionate debate about what works best. And so certainly here, you know, we are also, I think, very passionate on this topic and have a lot of big internal discussions, but we've kind of really, you know, settled upon some really sort of 5 key steps that we think are really valuable for a sustained learning journey. And so when we think about step 1 there, really what we're talking about when we say live online is we're talking about a program that is run with an in-person facilitator that's run in real time, that has a foundational component to it. So for us, that's the 2-day SIY program. It's a foundation that helps people build a broad emotional intelligence competency. The reason why we think it needs to be done live is because we find that pre-recorded materials or kind of, you know, that type of learning doesn't allow for the in-person transformative experience that we often find then kickstarts the rest of the behaviour change. So we tend to really advocate for a live experience. And we've also found too that during COVID, we've been able to recreate those conditions really successfully in the online context as well as in the in-person context, which was surprising to us, I must admit, but has actually been a really positive development for us as well. The second thing we look at too is building an online self-paced learning journey that comes after that. The reason we do that is that's really about developing that individual muscle. So you remember Friederike shared earlier, you know, it's kind of like going to the gym. The self-paced learning really helps for the development of the individual practice. And then as part 3, we think about the community piece. So building a learning community around the work is also very, very critical to not only normalizing it, but also then allowing people to have in-work context experiences of practicing those EQ skills and behaviours. And then I think when we get to part 4, what we're really thinking about there is how do we introduce structural changes into the workplace that then enable those behaviours to continue. So for example, we have a lot of kind of tools and toolkits and guides to really help people do things such as, you know, introduce, say, a mindful meeting, or to have an opportunity to start a practice group, or to have a leader perhaps model a different behaviour. So those types of structural changes are really critical to helping people see, signal, and be socialised into behaving differently in the workplace. And then the final component, what we look at as well, is what we would call a kind of a more breadthful or a deeper kind of transformation journey. And so if we think about the modular training, we tend to kind of think of that as really deep diving on specific emotional intelligence topics. So examples of that might be effective teaming, or perhaps building adaptive resilience during this difficult time that we're all in. And then also too, we think about it in terms of scaling the emotional intelligence efforts across the organisation. And we find that the train the trainer model is a really effective way of doing that. And so, of course, the fifth principle that we really encourage is, of course, strategic measurement and reporting. And again, this is also an area that I know is so kind of important to any program success. And so we wanted to share today just one example of an organisation where we've seen strategic measurement and reporting be really successful for them. And so just returning to that case study we shared earlier with Peter Bosselman, they ran a really in-depth study of how the SIY program related to a whole range of really important metrics inside the company. And what they found was, in this kind of pre and post assessment, they found that 4 weeks after the course, as you can see there, a significant 5.1% reduction in stress across folks who had attended, which is, I think, significant statistically. Interestingly too, an 11% increase in focus, and similarly a 6.6 increase in creativity, and also 8.4 in meaning. But I think what gets even more interesting here was that those benefits with the sustained practice actually increased over a 6-month period. And so I think that also too, with sustained practice, can lead to even more benefits over a longer period of time. And as a part of this study, they also found that the program itself, they calculated against these indices inside the company, and they found that the SIY program had a 200% return on investment for the organisation, which again was a significant business return for them as well.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think that's really impressive examples and really good to know the 5 steps for us as L&D practitioners. Before we dive into the peer learning, I would love to do a quick session on comments and questions. I already saw that Rebecca already asked a question in the chat, but it seems that there's another question from Rebecca. So, but please, in case you have a question, please just raise your hand on the video, and then Steph is happy to just call you.
Yeah, so you can find the raise hand button if you open the participant window from your toolbar at the bottom, and there's a little raise hand icon. And so we do have a, we have a question in the chat that is engagement equal to productivity? Maybe that's a good place to start.
Yeah, Steph, did you want to answer that one? I know it's something we talk a lot about.
Sure. Yeah. So I would say that they are very much related. They're not exactly the same, but in order to be productive, it is very helpful to really be engaged with your work. In the Search Inside Yourself program, we talk about a sense of flow and meaning being really critical pieces of productivity, particularly if we're thinking about productivity as something that you want to sustain over time. So work is more of a marathon than a sprint. So we can all be productive in short bursts without a lot of engagement, but really to sustain that level of productivity and make it sustainable for your health and well-being, it really helps to have that level of engagement.
We've also got another question here as well. Rebecca's just said, so you've changed face-to-face to live online. This is, I think, a question that was raised earlier around the role of virtual or live online programming in this current COVID period, and I think it's a great question. So just to kind of share on that, traditionally, we've done most of our programming face-to-face, and that was kind of our traditional learning model that we had, and then that was supplemented with blended learning after the program. Of course, the COVID period has been a kind of an innovative lab for all of us, I would say, an innovative opportunity for all of us in this space. And so we've found that we've now been running our programs virtually and in live online. I think there are some differences in how they've worked. We tend to run them shorter because we find that people are unable to focus for such long periods of time. And so we've done changes in terms of the overall way that we've structured the programs and to encourage more engagement, more feedback, having a lot more chat opportunities throughout as learning changes. But also what we found that's been interesting is that we've been able to reach populations inside companies that traditionally haven't been able to travel to the face-to-face opportunities. So it's actually led to an enhanced learning experience and a greater degree of accessibility for employees who are perhaps in more remote sites in a company who are generally not able to have that experience. So it's been actually a really interesting and innovative opportunity, I think.
Thank you. I think for time reasons, I would leave it with one question so that we have a couple of minutes left for 10 minutes left for the peer learning. So, but I want to emphasize it's the start of our, I think, peer learning of our exchange. So there's also going to be other opportunities afterwards. So, but I think for time reasons, we're going to limit it to one more question.
I think with that, our hands went down. So maybe we'll move into
I'm sorry.
And we can take some questions at the end if there's no time.
I see. I think there's one more in the chat box, actually. Is it possible to encourage emotional intelligence without having too much emphasis on feelings in an organization? The overemphasis on relationships is too much for some people who want to focus on tasks. And due to my experience, actually, in your question, there's already a little bit of the answer. So in my experience, it's not necessarily about focusing in the first step on emotions themselves, but it could also be like the entryway by having focus. And that's, I think, one of the main arguments. So really focusing on what's most important and what do you need for that? It's stress management and overall it's emotional intelligence. So that's how I would put it. In case Steph and Sarah, do you have anything to add on that?
I think that's great. Thank you. That's great, Friederike.
Great. Okay. So as we said, it's really important for us that we have some time left for the peer learning. So this is going to be now the session about like going into a breakout group and sharing about your best practices. And then also we're going to send out a survey, and we would be very happy if you could participate, and we're going to share the results of the survey with all of you who participated. So it's basically 2 parts of the peer learning. So speaking of breakout groups, Steph is going to assign you to breakout groups of 3, and we would be very happy if you could brainstorm answers on the question, how might you best establish EQ practices for yourself, your team, and your organization? And Steph just posted the question in the chat box as well, so that you have it in your breakout groups as well. And it's going to work how it did before. So we're going to have 8 minutes and then going to come back after these 8 minutes back to the main room.
Yes, and you'll be in groups of probably 2 or 3. I'm just moving some folks around here. All right.
Forward to continue that in another virtual format of face-to-face. And to end the session, I would suggest that everybody unmutes his or herself and then waves and says goodbye. To see you next time.
So if you can unmute, we'll say goodbye. Thank you to everyone, and thank you to our partners, Eve and Ban as well, who are on the call. We really appreciate seeing you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Have a great rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Nice.
Goodbye.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
Goodbye.